just finishing up the fresh strawberries that I have that I am going to put in the freezer. This is called tray pack, where we place the raw fruit on a tray. I'm going to set this little tray right in my freezer and let the strawberries freeze solid. Then I'll be able to take them out of the freezer and put them into a bag or into some type of container, and they'll stay as individual strawberries. So that's one freezer method we're going to talk about today as we talk about freezing food. So as we talk about freezing, there are a lot of advantages to freezing food, and a lot of foods can be frozen. There are some that can't be frozen, things like lettuce, because it's just got such a high water content, it just comes out as a limp little leaf, and you really can't do much with it. Cucumbers don't freeze well unless they're put into a freezer salad, but we'll talk about some of those things as we go along. Freezing helps preserve the color of food, the flavor, and the nutritional value. In fact, if you compared frozen food with fresh food, on the commercial level, frozen food is generally frozen at the peak of ripeness. So if I take fresh and frozen food and compare them nutrition-wise, they're quite similar. Texture is usually better with frozen foods than it is with other canning or food preserving methods like dehydrating or canning. And foods can be frozen in less time than they can be canned or dried. So there are some great advantages. You don't have to have any terribly special equipment to freeze food, but there are some items that you do need to have on hand. Freezing is rather simple. It adds convenience to the food. You can freeze something today and use it several months from now. Portions, I don't have to freeze large portions. I can freeze in very small portions, or I can freeze in larger portions. It just depends on my family. And then one of the big advantages is a couple pots of boiling water, it's over. You don't heat up the kitchen with all of the excess water you have going. Something we need to think about with freezing. Freezing does have some disadvantages. It does affect the texture of the food. And part of that is because as food freezes, the water in the food freezes and expands and breaks the cell walls of that food. So something that might have been firm to start with, as those cell walls break, it's going to be softer in texture when I take it out. A good example of that is if I took a tomato and put it in the freezer, I might slice that tomato to put on my sandwich and love that as a fresh tomato. If I put that same tomato in the freezer and slice it to put on a sandwich, it won't be anything I want to have on a sandwich because it will be so much softer. I need to cook those frozen tomatoes to make them something that I want to do. Another disadvantage is that you have to have a freezer. And freezers run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't ever shut off. So there's an electric bill along with that, plus the investment of the freezer. Something to think about, you may not have enough freezer space. It depends on what type of refrigerator you have, if there's a freezer above that, or if you need to buy what's called a deep freeze or a chest freezer. Think about that before you get started in the freezing realm. And then storage space will be limited by how much freezer space you have on hand. Another thing that people worry about is when the electricity goes out. What's one of the first things we go to look at? We got to look at the refrigerator and freezer to see what's in it. So something else to think about. Whereas if you're canning food, you don't have to worry about electric going out. Freezing will inactivate the enzymes that cause food to age, or it will slow it down. It's not going to inactivate them, it slows it down. It also slows down the bacteria that's in any food. It doesn't make it go away, it just slows it down. So when I thaw that food back out, that bacteria gets happy again as it comes up to room temperature and starts multiplying and causes spoilage of food, or can also cause foodborne illness depending on the type of bacteria that's in there. We can deactivate the enzymes, the aging enzymes that are in the food by blanching, and we need to blanch certain foods. We'll talk about that technique in just a little bit, but we will blanch certain foods to help inactivate that enzyme that causes aging. Some foods, we don't have to worry about that. There are enzymes in vegetables that we definitely have to destroy by blanching. In fruit, we can usually control it with an acid like ascorbic acid or some other additive. Some things will go rancid in the freezer. Things that have high fat content, like meats, can go rancid. We're not going to talk about meat today. We're really going to focus more on fruits and vegetables. But we do have information at our office that covers freezing of all types of food. So the rate of freezing is very important, and our goal is to put the food in the freezer and get it frozen as quickly as possible. We'll never be able to quick freeze it like they do in a commercial operation. We don't have the equipment for that, but we can employ some techniques that can get the food frozen as fast as possible. One way to do that is turn your freezer as cold as it will go 3 or 4 or 5 hours before you start the freezing process, or even the night before. That way you're starting out with a really cold freezer. When I put the food in, I'm heating that freezer up just a little bit because I'm putting warm food in. So I need to make sure that I try to keep the freezer as cold as I can. Another way to do it is only to freeze small amounts of food at one time. And they say there's a certain amount for 2 to 3 for the amount of cubic feet of your freezer. So you really can't freeze just gobs and gobs and gobs of pumpkin and put it in the freezer and think that it's all going to freeze quickly. The more unfrozen food you have in your freezer, the longer it's going to take for all of it to freeze. So you have to think about that too. You need to process things in batches. You do need to hold your freezer at 0 degrees, and one of the best ways to check that is with a freezer thermometer. And you can place this in your freezer. It is best to place a freezer thermometer in your freezer and not rely on any displays that might be showing on the outside of your freezer. Those might work pretty well, but sometimes they're off. So it is best just to have a separate freezer thermometer in your freezer, and these don't cost very much. They're available in all kinds of places. Lots of vegetables you can keep for a year. We do have a whole chart. The longer you keep it, it will be safe to eat. The quality goes down the longer you keep it. So just keep that in mind. You might want to freeze, 500 quarts of green beans because you have the room for it. But if you're not planning to use that amount of green beans in a year, it's probably not worth it. You probably need to think about some other people to give it to, or think about that. Plus you need to maintain it at 0 degrees to keep it that long. The warmer your freezer is, the less time something will stay good in your freezer. We often think about freezer burn, and you've probably heard that term, and generally we think of it with meat, but it can also happen with fruits and vegetables. And generally with meat, an area of the meat will turn very gray and look very dry. That's called freezer burn, and that's because air has gotten in and started to kind of dehydrate that section of the meat or that section of the product. It's safe to eat. It's not very good to eat. It has no flavor. It's going to be tough and chewy, and it's just not a good quality product. So something to think about. Another thing to remember with freezing, as with any type of food preservation, is sanitation. You need to have a clean surface. So you need to wipe your surface down with soap and water, and clean your cutting boards and clean your hands. This is one of the biggest reasons why we have foodborne illness, is because we don't wash our hands frequently enough. And then the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we follow recommended procedures. So there are recipes available. We have those at our office, and we're more than happy to share those. You can find freezing recipes on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, or Ball Canning also has freezing in their books. So there are some tips for using packaging material when you freeze. One thing that you need to think about is not using old cottage cheese containers or old margarine containers or things like that that you might have saved over the years. A lot of those lids, if you put them on, they don't totally cut out all of the air, so they really aren't designed to be put in the freezer. The other thing is, once they're frozen, sometimes that plastic is really brittle, and so if you accidentally knock those against something else in the freezer, they'll break, and then you have a broken container, and you may not even know it, that it was split or broken. So they do make freezer containers. They make rigid side freezer containers, which are great for things like peaches in syrup, or dry packed blackberries, anything like that really work well in a rigid container. You can also purchase some aluminum foil style containers that have a lid that are designed for freezers. You can use those. You can use reusable type containers. The thing to look for on these types of containers is it needs to have a little freezer symbol on it, and it looks like a little snowflake. So look for that little symbol and you should be fine. You can also use canning jars that are rated for canning or freezing, and it will say that on the box. And my only caution with that is you can either use wide mouth or narrow mouth jars. Remember, it's easier to get food out of a wide mouth jar than it is a narrow mouth, especially if it's not totally thawed. And the other thing, if you're putting food in the jar and putting it in the freezer, sometimes when you're setting things down, you'll hit the shoulder of this jar and you'll crack the jar if you're not careful. So it's not a problem if you freeze in glass canning jars, but just think about where it is. The other thing is how much space it's going to take up in your freezer. So a lot of people will freeze in a resealable plastic bag type. Make sure that you look for a freezer safe bag, not a regular storage bag. It's a little bit thicker milliliter of plastic and will keep the air and keep the product longer. And we do recommend that you don't freeze in anything over a half-gallon size. It's just too much mass of food to try to get it cold all the way to the center in a reasonable amount of time. So try to think how you're going to use it in the end, what size of container you want to freeze things in. You can also use heavy-duty aluminum foil, or you can use freezer paper, which is a coated paper, and it will help keep moisture and everything out. Oftentimes we'll use this for meats or breads and those types of products that we can actually wrap and not have to try to control, whereas fruits and vegetables, we're probably going to end up with one of these types of products. Make sure that it's durable and leak-proof, it doesn't get brittle, it's resistant to oil, grease, and it has a good sealing lid, and also that you can put some type of label on it, because there's nothing worse than putting food in the freezer that you didn't label, and frozen pumpkin and frozen tomatoes look the same after everything's all frozen. So if you don't know what you put in there, you're never going to know what to take out. So food should be cool before it's frozen, so as you're working with things, things will cool down. You don't want to put any piping hot food into your freezer. All you'll do is raise the temperature of the freezer, and it will just take that much longer for things to freeze. Pack in your serving size quantities, as I mentioned, so if you only want one portion, buy small containers and pack it in a small portion. If you have a whole family to feed, you can pack it in a larger portion. Think about what you're going to do with the product before you get there. How are you going to use it in the end? How are you going to thaw it? What needs to happen to it? The other thing you need to do is think about how I'm going to get the air out of that container. So I can either pack it full with leaving headspace, or I can try to pull the air out of a plastic bag. You can also use those vacuum sealers. Those work just fine. If you want to invest in that, just make sure that you buy the freezer style packaging material. It's a little bit thicker milliliter again. It will suck the air out. That works really well for dry items. Doesn't work so well if you're trying to put a liquid on things. And then just put a tight lid. Make sure that the lid is really tight on your container. You can always wrap freezer tape around it to help add an extra seal to the lid. It just helps keep that extra air out. Okay, so let's talk about freezing peaches. And peaches in season are just phenomenal, and we love to keep that fresh flavor and use them later, maybe in January on some pound cake or some angel food cake, something like that. So it's not too hard to freeze peaches. You have several options. I will show you a sugar syrup pack method, a syrup pack method, and I'll also show you a dry pack method. So to peel our peaches, one of the easiest ways to do that is just to take your peach and a sharp knife and cut an X in the blossom end or the bottom of your peach and drop it in hot water, boiling water. And it should only take 30 seconds to a minute to let the skin loosen. It depends on how ripe your peaches are, how easily the skin will come off. Sometimes if they're really, really ripe, it will peel very easily without even having to plunge it into hot water. We're going to just let those sit for just a little bit. Normally, you can see the peel actually starting to leave the peach. You'll actually see it split off of the peach when it's ready to go. So, in the meantime, I have some that are already sliced here, and this one we've already peeled. And it might be a clingstone peach, or it might just be because it wasn't completely ripe, but I do need to try to cut it off of the pit instead of just opening it up and being able to cut it. So being very careful. I'm going to cut those slices off and put those in a bowl, so I have those ready to go. And again, this may not be the prettiest thing, but this winter it's going to be very pretty. Okay, so our peaches have been in the boiling water or in the hot water for a little bit, and I'm going to just take those out and plunge them into some ice water to stop any cooking activity that's going on. And also, so I can handle it, so I can go ahead and peel the peaches. It's no fun trying to peel hot fruit. I'm going to turn off my stove because I'm done with that at the moment. And so here in just a minute, I can take a hold of this, and if I should just be able to peel that skin right off. It should just come right off without too much trouble. These peaches aren't terribly ripe, but it did help a little bit to be able to soften that peach up a little bit to peel. So peel around, get all the skin off. I really don't want to freeze that skin. It will only get tougher, and it really doesn't enhance the flavor at all. So I kind of want to peel my peaches before I put them in the freezer. And there are some foods that you don't have to worry about this with. Obviously berries, you don't have to worry about peeling those. Try to think of any other fruits that, grapes you can freeze without having to worry about. So just do this real quick. And then we'll just take and we're going to cut it in slices off of the pit. And again, depending on the type of peach you have and how ripe it is, will depend on how easy it is to get it off of the seed or the pit. This one's just being cantankerous. So again, you always want to freeze quality product, and normally you'd want a riper peach than this to freeze. This is probably going to do well if it has sugar on it, just to help sweeten it up some. It smells really good. It just isn't cooperating. So I have my peaches here. We're going to go ahead and process those. Okay, so I'm going to pack some peaches to start with, and you'll notice I didn't put these peaches in any type of anti-darkening agent like lemon juice water or ascorbic acid water. And the reason I didn't do that is because I'm working rather quickly and I'm using a small amount. If I had a large amount of peaches I was doing at one time, I might have to do that. And you use 1 teaspoon of ascorbic acid to 1 gallon of cool water. And ascorbic acid is vitamin C. This happens to be a vitamin C powder, and you can buy it generally at a health food store. It's quite expensive, but you don't use that much. So that's one way you can do it. You can also buy a product called Fruit Fresh, and if you buy Fruit Fresh, then you need to follow the directions on the label. It really isn't, I don't have a lot of directions for it, but they are on the label. And then you can also use citric acid, but ascorbic acid works better than citric acid. You can also use a lemon juice mixture. Sugar syrup also helps, or salt and vinegar is probably the least desirable solution, but it does work to help prevent browning. So I'm going to put these in my freezer safe container. It is a rigid side container. I've already mixed up a 40% sugar solution, and in any recipes that you find for freezing food, you'll find different percentages of sugar syrup. There's 10, 20, 30, 40. It's recommended for a 40% sugar solution to come up with the best quality of peaches. Okay, I'm going to show you how to syrup pack these peaches. I put a little bit of syrup, a 40% syrup solution, in the bottom of my rigid container, which is a freezer safe container. I can then pack it with some peaches, and I want to try to get as many peaches as I can in without smashing them or causing problems with them. So I'll kind of move them around. I don't want to save air. Air just takes up space and affects the quality of the final product. I do need to leave 1/2 inch head space because these will expand in the freezer. I'm sure many of you have frozen a can of pop that exploded in the freezer. It's because it didn't have enough head space for the product to expand in the can or the bottle. Same thing with milk. Sometimes milk will do that. So I check my 1/2 inch. Nothing should be in the 1/2 inch. I'm going to put syrup to cover my peaches. And I can mix this syrup up the day before. It should be cool. All I do is I dissolve sugar in the water and then I cool it. And I can mix it up the day before and put it in the refrigerator. I can put just a little bit more syrup. I want my peaches to stay under the syrup, but I have to leave a 1/2 inch of space so that as this product expands, it doesn't come out of the container. Then I'm going to wipe the container rim with a wet paper towel just to get off any pieces of peach or any syrup that might be on there before I put my lid on, because I want to make sure I get a good seal. I also have a piece of freezer paper, just a little piece, that I'm going to crumble, and I'm put that on top of the peaches so that it helps keep them submerged underneath the syrup. And because if the ones that aren't under the syrup can start to turn dark faster than the others, and we don't want that to happen. We want nice, bright, happy peaches when we take them out to eat them in this winter. So put this on, I put it on really tight. I'll take a permanent marker, write the date, what it is, probably put a sticker on this since this is dark, and have this ready to go in my freezer. It's all ready to be stored. Okay? We're going to dry pack or sugar pack our peaches. We have 4 cups of sliced peaches here. I have ascorbic acid dissolved in water, and I'm going to put this ascorbic acid solution on top of my peaches, and this really just helps keep the peaches from turning dark in the freezer. It's a preservation method. A lot of the light fruits will turn dark and become unappealing. So I'm just going to mix this together to coat the peaches. Then I need to add 2/3 of a cup of sugar, just regular granulated sugar, to my peaches. If you want to use something other than sugar, you'll need to find the recipe for that. Some people will use honey, things like that. And I will stir that around just to start getting that sugar dissolved. I'm being very gentle with it. I don't want to break up my peaches, but I do want all of that sugar coating the peaches. And I'll let these sit for a little bit just to let that sugar go ahead and finish dissolving, and get the peaches ready to be packed. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to prepare my container that I'm going to put the peaches in, and I'm going to use a flexible plastic bag for this particular product, and I like to put it in a glass or something so that it will stay upright, and if I can, I'll turn the edges down so that I don't get so much syrup and everything on those as I'm filling the bag. Try to open it up as much as I can. And this has been sitting here for a little while, so this looks really good. Sugar's all incorporated. And then I will add my peaches to my freezer bag. And this is a freezer bag, so it's a little bit thicker than a regular storage bag. Spoon those in, and all of this should fit in a quart-size bag. Just lift this up a little bit to put them toward the bottom. Take my bag out of the holder that I had it in. I'm going to wipe the sealing section of the bag off just to make sure I don't have any sugar or any syrup there, so that my bag will seal well. I'm going to press it to get as much air as I can out. I'm going to seal it part of the way, and then a little trick you can use if you don't have an electric vacuum sealer. You can just take a straw, put it down in the bag, seal it up as well as you can on both sides. Up on the straw, get as much of the air out as you can. Flatten this out. I like to store my fruit and all of my vegetables that I'm putting in a plastic bag flat. That way I can stack them together, and it takes up less space in the freezer. Yes. And I need to label the bag with what's in here, so I would put sugar pack peaches, the date, and put it in the freezer, and that way I'll remember what I did. Okay, let's talk about freezing green beans or other vegetables, and these need to be blanched. And blanching does several things with vegetables. It softens hard vegetables to make the packaging easier. It helps remove some of the microorganisms that might be on here, even though I've washed these before I snapped them. And it helps destroy the enzyme that causes vegetables to become off-flavored. So it's important that we blanch. Each vegetable has a different time for blanching, and it will be in the recipe. And you need to blanch for the amount of time required. Over blanching simply cooks the vegetable and makes it much more soft, causing the quality to be less. Under blanching is actually worse than no blanching at all. Under blanching just makes those enzymes happier and will cause the aging process to go faster. So you really need to blanch it for the amount of time. And different items, like if I used whole green beans, they might have a different blanching time than cut green beans. Or corn on the cob has a different blanching time than corn off the cob. So just make sure you read your recipe and follow those directions. So I have a big pot of boiling water here, and it has a, that's hot. It's got steam coming out, and steam burns. So there's boiling water in here, and it does have a basket already in this container. If you don't have a basket, you can always just use some type of strainer or something like that to get the item out. Always use quality produce. I pulled these out. These are pretty good looking beans, but I've already snapped these. And I want to put this in the water. You don't want to put too much in the water, and you don't start the cooking until the water returns to a boil. So I need to up my temperature here to high, and the minute it starts coming back to a boil, I'll set my timer. In the meantime, while those are going, I can get my ice water ready to go, because once I blanch these, I will put them in ice water for the same amount of time. And if this doesn't come back to a boil within 1 minute, it means I put too much product in there. You don't want to overload the blanching water, so you really need to work in small batches and just keep your water going. Put some in, put it in the ice water, package, and you'll get a rhythm going once you get into this system. But also remember, you don't want to package more product than will fit in your freezer and freeze it within a reasonable amount of time. So keep that in mind too. Okay, our water is returned to a boil, so I'm going to set my timer, and I will cook the green beans, called blanching. Once I take them out of the blanch water, I will put them in ice water. So we'll do that here as we go along. In the meantime, I want to talk a little bit about, there are a couple of other methods that people always question on how to blanch. One is microwave blanching, and you might find some directions for that someplace. We do not recommend that method because microwave energy is so sporadic in your microwave. You may end up with something that's completely cooked versus something that's not been blanched at all. So you get a very uneven heating process in a microwave. So we don't recommend microwave blanching. You can steam blanch, and to steam blanch you would start basically with the same method, only you won't have as much water in the pot. In this particular pot, your water level would be rather low because the basket sits about that far off of the bottom. So I'll put water in the bottom. I will layer 1 layer of product in the basket. So I can't put a bunch in, I can only make 1 layer, then I will steam it. You normally steam for 1.5 times the amount of time you would normally water blanch. Okay, so our blanching time is up, our timer went off, so I will simply turn off my heat source and take off the lid very carefully because it's very hot. I'm going to lift this basket out of the hot water, the boiling water. If I had another batch to put in there, I would leave it on the burner and have my other batch ready to go. Pour this in to the ice water and make sure that all of my beans are out. And I need the cold water to cover my beans, and they will sit there for 3 minutes. So the same amount of time that I had them in the boiling water, I will also have them in the ice water. Okay, so our beans have been in the ice water for 3 minutes, and now they're ready to pack. And the ice water bath really just makes the cooking process stop. So I'm not cooking the beans. All I did was blanch the beans to inactivate the enzymes and to get any extra dirt or microorganisms off of them and make them ready for quality freezing. I'm going to get as much water as I can off. Sometimes, depending on the product, I might have some clean dish towels out that I can put it out on clean dish towels. Other times I just try to shake it and get as much water off as I can. Again, I have a container to hold my package straight up. I could pack this in rigid packaging, or I can put it in a just in a flexible bag, resealable bag. My hands are clean. I did wash them before I started in on all of this. And sometimes hands are just as easy as spoons. So again, I want to get as much air out as possible. I will pack these in. I can fold this over, kind of roll the bag as I seal to get as much air out as possible. Air is the enemy in freezing. And then kind of flatten them out so that they are ready to be put into the freezer. Normally, before I fill the bag, I write what I'm putting in there on the bag. So I'm putting beans, green beans, and I'm putting the date. And I will put these in my freezer and they're ready to go. So we've talked about blanching vegetables and then packing them in freezer safe containers. This is just some examples of some freezer frozen foods that I made the other week. Green beans that were blanched and packaged, and you'll notice that they're flat. This is some corn. Corn is wonderful when it's frozen. Some people like canned corn, other people like frozen corn. These happen to be beet greens. I canned some beets and I had the greens left over, so I froze those. I'll add these to a soup or make a stew or something like that with these. But it's a great way to use those up at a later time and not have to throw those away. So these, they're dated, they're labeled, I know what I did, and they'll last 6 months to a year in the freezer. I do need to plan to use them, and I should put them on an inventory so I don't lose track of what's in my freezer. I have some onions and some peppers sitting here too, because I wanted to remind you or let you know that tomatoes, onions, and peppers do not have to be blanched before they're put in the freezer, which is wonderful. So if I have a recipe at home that calls for half of an onion and I don't know what else I'm going to do with that onion anytime soon, I'll go ahead and chop it up or slice it up, put it in a freezer safe container and put it up in the freezer. So I always have a supply of frozen peppers and onions ready to add to any recipe that I have. Tomatoes, you can just wash the tomatoes, chop the tomatoes up and put them in the freezer with the skin or without the skin. It's up to you. If you put the skin in the freezer, it will come off as you're cooking the item. And you'll end up with, I call it little pencil shaving like pieces of skin, which for some people that's okay, other people don't like that. One way to get around that is to freeze the tomatoes either in halves or quarters or whole so that when that piece of skin comes off, it's pretty big and you can pull it out of your finished product. Depends on what you're making. Again, you try to freeze what you're going to use it for. So if I'm going to use it in tomato sauce or whatever, I'll chop it up pretty fine. Again, with the peppers, it depends on what I think I may use it in and whether I'm going to slice it or dice it or chop it up pretty fine. Onions the same way. Spices, a lot of people want to know about whether they should freeze things with spices in them like a marinara sauce or casseroles, those types of things. Keep in mind that spices can provide an off flavor in some foods that are frozen, or sometimes they'll get stronger. You'll think, oh, this is wonderfully seasoned, and then when you pull it out of the freezer, it'll be like, oh, I didn't quite get that one quite right. And it's because in the freezer, it changes the quality of the spice. So sometimes it's better just to freeze plain tomatoes and then use those tomatoes in a finished product, like a spaghetti sauce or something like that, when you start cooking it, instead of trying to freeze marinara sauce. Same thing with peppers and onions. Just freeze them the way they are and then add them to a finished product. And you should have great success. Just remember that frozen vegetables are best when they're cooked from the frozen state. So I could take these green beans or this corn, put it in a pan, cook it, it'll be just fine. Fruit, on the other hand, we generally, when we thaw it, we are going to take it till it still has some ice crystals in it if we're going to use it just as the fruit. So if I wanted to take the peaches that I made earlier and put them over pound cake, they would still have some ice crystals in them. I wouldn't thaw them completely. Now if I was going to put that in a pie or something like that, I can also use those partially thawed. So you kind of have to know what end result you want. Just remember that a lot of foods can easily be frozen. Doesn't take a lot of special equipment. It's a lot faster than canning, takes a lot less time. And as long as you maintain your freezer at 0 degrees, your food should be safe for quite a long time. The quality will decrease the longer they stay in the freezer. So don't try to freeze enough to last you for 25 years. Try to keep your inventory and use stuff as you go along. Only freeze quality foods. Try not to freeze things that aren't good to start with. It's not going to get any better in the freezer. Pick the right packaging. Try to get as much air out as you possibly can, and then make sure that you label and date items. And then all of the food that we've done today, the green beans, the peaches, even this corn, it's going to be so wonderful this winter when we eat those, and we're going to be reminded of a super summer that we had. So enjoy your freezing fruits and vegetables. Again, if you have any questions, call your local extension office. We have recipes, we have information. Just give us a chance. We may not be in, so give us a chance and we'll call you back and help you all we can. That's what we're here to do. So have a great time.